AI in Action is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Our host brings you the leading minds in AI, sharing their story, their success, and their advice. Focusing on fast-tracking you to the top, AI in Action cuts through the hype to help you kickstart your data science career. To listen to the latest AI in Action podcast, head over to www.alldus.com/podcast or subscribe via iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Podcasts.
You're listening to AI in Action. I'm your host, JP Valentine. Our guest today is Lisa Palmer. Lisa is the Chief Technology Advisor for Splunk. Lisa, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, JP. Thanks for hosting me.
No, it's our pleasure. Lisa, let's start with your background. Can you talk us through your journey from where you got started in technology, taking us through some of the interesting roles you've held along the way, right before your current role where you've recently joined Splunk?
I've actually had a little bit of an unusual journey. I started my career as my undergraduate's in engineering, and I started in an engineering function. I spent 2 whole months in that role wherein I was doing a lot of data analysis and learned their data structures inside and out, and found myself in IT 2 whole months into my engineering career. And I have spent the rest of my career pretty much in the technology space. So I stayed in those kind of practitioner roles all the way up to, I went through project management, customer service, I did application development, all across the whole span of the technology arena, clear up to my last role was a Chief Innovation Officer role, which was a combination of Chief Marketing Officer and Chief Innovation Officer. I did that for a financial services organization, and it was such a fascinating journey to go through all of those interactions between what the business was trying to achieve and what we were trying to provide to them from an IT perspective, and being able to do that within the drastic constraints that IT organizations are put into from a financial perspective every year. So that gave me a great deal of empathy for the challenges that IT practitioners face. Kind of the next major part of my journey was I took a role as an enterprise sales executive for Microsoft. And I spent about 6 years in that role, and I was very excited about the opportunity to add that key experience to my portfolio of experiences, because I really hadn't had, up until that point, I hadn't had any opportunity to be directly engaged on the revenue creating side of the business. And I learned a tremendous amount in that role about all of the challenges that are inherent in selling at an enterprise level. You really have to do it from 2 perspectives. You have to come at it, obviously, in your interactions with your customers. And my bent has always been about making sure that we're maximizing the business outcomes, the business impacts that come from the projects that we work on. So having that focus is one piece of it. But what I really learned in that role was how critical the internal selling was to be able to get all of the resources brought to the table that you needed to best be able to serve your clients. And so that was a fantastic learning experience for me in all of the challenges that were inherent in that kind of inside selling part of what an enterprise salesperson has to face. And then the third kind of major leg in my journey was a role that I held with Gartner. And in that role, I was working directly with executives from all over the globe that were focused on how to leverage technology and the research, this fantastic research that Gartner's analysts were bringing to the table, helping those executives to apply what we knew from that research inside of their environments. Again, with the entire focus being on how do we create business outcomes and business impact with the technology that we're bringing to the table. So those 3 kind of parts of my journey led me to be very interested in artificial intelligence and what we can do with data specifically, because my heart has always been in and around data, and what we can do with data specifically to help businesses to drive to drive those kinds of outcomes. And what's so exciting in today's environment is to see this full engagement from some of our biggest corporations globally around being purpose driven and not only working to be profitable, but also working to focus on being mission and purpose oriented with the power of their brands. And so having all of that brought together has led me to this exciting new role that I hold now with Splunk as their chief technical advisor.
Thank you, Lisa. It's amazing to hear you break it down into three separate areas, and they've become the pillars and the foundations to what you're doing now. In particular, the emphasis on the time that you've spent working with C-suite board level executives to help them understand this impact to this technology and getting that buy-in, because without it, the majority of projects will fail. So yeah, Lisa, now taking us to your recent switch to Splunk, who are obviously an incredible organization with amazing products. But could you start break it down to us for anyone who's listening and not as familiar with Splunk? Who are Splunk? Then take us through what your role and the objective is going to be.
Splunk has been just exploding in the marketplace, and they have been a leader in IT monitoring and being able to really drive insights from what's happening. They're a pioneer around IoT technologies. They're a pioneer around what data to everything can actually mean. And so what is really exciting about the particular role that I hold as their chief technical advisor is this understanding of the power of the data to everything Splunk platform in their ability to impact digital transformation at the truly enterprise level. So where it's very easy for some organizations to think about data as being somewhat siloed or being owned and controlled by IT, for example, data really needs to be under the purview of the business and driving business objectives. And so what the Splunk platform allows us to do is to really dig into how to take that data and turn it into true business transformation, to start to have conversations at the executive level and at the board level around how do we take this data that we have, that literally there are petabytes of data being gathered every day and not being leveraged. So we have this plethora of data that organizations could be gaining insights from that isn't being surfaced and leveraged yet. And so it's really important for us to start to educate our executive teams and our boards around what is possible with things like changing their business model, with being able to serve customers in new and creative ways. The COVID situation has created a massive pivot moment. And what we know from history is that those organizations who pivot smartly, wisely, and really step into the potential that is offered at pivotal moments, those are the organizations that win. And those are the ones that emerge more profitable and creating more purpose-oriented outcomes when coming out of the backside of a disruption phase. So what we want to make sure that we're doing from a Splunk perspective is arming our executive clients and our executive boards with the information that allows them to make those really savvy choices that pivots them in this moment of disruption and allows them to really explode coming out of the challenges that we're being faced with on a global perspective right now.
Exciting. Well, what a time to be joining an amazing organization. I want to get your insight and hopefully some advice for data professionals at all levels of how you go about effectively working with non-technical staff, whether it's board level or an individual IC. Clearly, your role is to get that maximum understanding and buy-in for business impact in order to drive the projects forward. But that needs to happen at all levels, or every step on the ladder, in order for a project to be successful. So you've been doing this over the years now, and you've found a successful way of doing so. Could you give us some insight into the most effective way, or the various strategies that are available to a data professional in communicating with non-technical staff?
So glad that you brought this up. It's a critical skill for us as technical professionals to bring to the table, is this ability to bridge the gap between our language and our lingo that we're comfortable with and the language that you are needing to use to get an idea or an opportunity to really land with a business owner or a business partner. And I think that the most critical thing to do to drive that communication is to make sure that you understand what they need to achieve. So I always tell people, you've got to do the work. You have to put in the time, do the research to really understand your target audience. So regardless of what level you're at in the organization, you need to make sure that you understand what they're actually trying to achieve with the technical project that you're working on for them. It's very easy when we are working on projects to get down into the weeds from a technical perspective and create some really cool capabilities that frankly may go largely unused. There's actually a statistic that over 80% of capability that is created in technology products and services is actually never used. And I believe that that comes about because of this communication gap. If from a technical perspective, we stay very clear, we have to do the work and understand first what it is that they're trying to achieve, so that we don't, as the project progresses, get pulled down into the capabilities of what's possible and lose focus on what I think of as true north, which is that business capability that you're trying to make sure that you're enabling and creating for them. Because remember that we have the opportunity as technical individuals to bring ideas to the table about how we could help them to achieve what the outcome is, versus being order takers or just, saying, okay, they told us to go do X. If you really understand the outcome that is trying to be created, you may come across opportunities during the project that allow you to make ideas available to them about a different way that they could go about creating that outcome, or create an even bigger impact because of what you're learning as you go through the project. So making sure that you understand what they are trying to achieve and keep all of your efforts tightly focused on making sure that you're driving that desired outcome is the key.
You make it sound so simple, but you also, in the answer, give some insight into how challenging it can be for organizations with the high failure rate. So looking ahead, talking to us about your new role, obviously a new exciting time. Can you give us some insight into what you're going to be focused on, the types of organizations that you're going to be helping with, and obviously understanding all of the various possibilities for Splunk? Can you give us some insight into some of the things that you're going to be trying to accomplish with some examples of industries and clients?
Yes, of course. So from a practical perspective, I want to make sure that we are focusing efforts on the key critical clients that have got some of these massive challenges in place in front of them. And so obviously there's opportunities in manufacturing. Manufacturing is being extremely challenged during this period of time. And what we have seen happen inside of that space is that years and years and years of focus on efficiency have created supply chains that are very fragile. And so what we're seeing come out of the COVID situation is a need for organizations to create not only efficiency in supply chain, which is always going to be important, but that they're also creating resiliency in supply chain. And there's so much opportunity to do that by leveraging the data that is available to us. So that's one particular area where there is an opportunity to really dig in and create some impact for organizations to make sure that we're able to do things like, you want to make sure that when an organization needs to shift from their typical manufacturing processes to all of a sudden they need to be able to provide PPE for a global pandemic, then we need to make sure that we're helping them to arm them with the data to make that pivot, literally overnight to make those kinds of things happen. So that's a very practical example of something that data can fuel and allow organizations to literally do kind of an overnight pivot from what they typically do into a completely different space that is needed not only to drive those business profits, to keep all of their people employed and to do all of those things they need to do from a shareholder value perspective, but also that they're providing the purpose of being able to help organizations to have key items that they need to keep people safe. So it's a great example.
Yeah, it really is. And it also gives you perspective the opportunity to work on specific elements of technology, which I know you're passionate about. You mentioned earlier having a real interest in data and AI. So taking that and going a little bit deeper, AI means a lot to many different people, and often we spend time just cutting through the hype behind it to showcase what can actually be accomplished with the better use of technology. I know for you, this is something that you spend a lot of time on, whether it's from your doctorate or areas that are specifically important to you. Could you give us some insight into, combining your role at Splunk, where you're going to be working with some of the largest organizations in the world to accomplish digital transformation in the right way, but then also working on stuff that you're personally interested in?
Absolutely. So we had talked a little bit, JP, about the fact that I'm passionate around artificial intelligence, which of course the quality of outcomes that you can create through artificial intelligence is entirely reliant upon the quality of data that is being fed into the systems that are being trained from an artificial intelligence perspective. So what that means is that we've got to make sure that we are committed to overcoming things like bias in our data sets, that we're making sure that we've got enough, the quantity of data that's going to allow us to properly train our models. We've got to make sure that we are being very ethical and really thinking through the potential output and the outcomes that are going to be driven by what is happening with artificial intelligence. So one of the things that I'm really passionate about is making sure that we have governance around artificial intelligence that allows us to do two things simultaneously. We need to make AI profitable while also making it responsible. And I absolutely believe that those two things can be achieved together. It doesn't have to be, pit one against the other. It's a matter of making sure that we create a governance structure certainly at the American level and ideally at the global level that allows organizations to simultaneously be profitable and to make safe, wise, human-centered choices with AI as we move forward.
What are the biggest challenges that you face at specifically communicating with the non-technical decision makers, first and foremost to understand the impact of technology, but then also talking about the impact of doing it in an ethical, safe way and showcasing data governance? Because the challenges are not unique to any one organization, but the better we can understand what the main challenges are in getting that buy-in and understanding, the more successful we'll be with overcoming them. So could you give us any insight from what you see? What are the main ones that pop up, and how can we as a community do a better job of making sure that this is in the forefront?
One of the things that's really simple and needs to be thoughtfully pursued is making sure that the data sets that we have are not themselves inherently leaving out people in the creation of the data. So if there are massive data gaps, then the solutions that will be reached, the conclusions rather that will be reached by the artificial intelligence will not be accurate and could even potentially be dangerous. So, for example, if we're gathering data and we're not disaggregating based on gender differences or physicality differences in healthcare, we may miss the fact that that biological females have particular tendencies towards some diseases versus others. There's a large gap in data. This one particularly in healthcare is around this disaggregation of biologically male and female data sets, and by not having the ability to see the totality and the individual applicability, you could actually increase the odds of creating damage with particular treatments for one part of your community versus the other because you have an inaccuracy or an incomplete data set. So making sure it's very simple that we are gathering data across the broadest possible set of individuals so that when we train these models, that we can see those trends. If we don't have the identifiers that put people into, say, gender buckets or racial buckets, the things that will allow an artificial intelligence model to actually look for trends, then we're going to create challenges, and we're going to create potentially harmful outcomes by recommending treatments that aren't going to be best for that particular subsegment of our community. So gathering data, focusing on making sure that we're gathering data and that we are labeling data in the most effective ways possible so that those artificial intelligence models can be properly trained is the first step. We have to have huge amounts of data. The more data, the better for us to be able to come up with the absolute highest quality conclusions based on that data. So gathering the data and making sure it's labeled properly is critical underpinning.
Final question for me, Lisa. You've had some very interesting roles along the way, and I think that your recent switch to Splunk is really very exciting, and I can't wait to see what's in store. I want to get your take on what you're most excited about. What are you looking forward to in this new venture, and the impact it can have?
I am incredibly excited to be on board at Splunk. They are certainly progressive in the way that they're thinking about how to leverage data. Data to everything is the way that they're thinking about problem solving. And what happens with that kind of big picture thinking is that you have the opportunity, based on this incredible technology that Splunk has, we will have the opportunity to move, to really truly make impact, to move the needle on these business outcomes that so desperately need to be improved, the outcomes that need to be impacted. And so if we think about the possibilities within healthcare are enormous, the possibilities for us to make global impact in things like sustainability and what we can do with regard to public health and safety, there's just massive amounts of opportunity for us to leverage data in this way that we think about data to everything in a tremendously high impact fashion that isn't limited to any one little corner of the world, but we'll actually have the opportunity to create this impact at a global level. And that's why I'm so excited to be a member of Splunk's organization, because they have Splunk has the intellectual capital, the high quality products, and the powerful leadership that will enable that impact at a global level. And what an exciting opportunity for me to be part of that.
Absolutely. Well, Lisa, we wish you all the best on your new venture. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us about your own background, your current role, giving us some insight into the many applications for Splunk, and then also the importance of the impact of AI with ethics, safety, and governance at the forefront. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
It's absolutely been my pleasure to be here.
AI in Action is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Alldus offer an exec search program. Alldus can help you discover how data science and AI can transform your company. With our unrivaled network of C-suite executives and senior AI professionals, we offer retained search services across the US and Europe. Get the Alldus advantage. Become a member of the Alldus community and enjoy some of the following: AI meetups. Once a month, our community gathers to listen to some of the leading experts in the world of data science and AI. Our speakers come from all over the world, including Dublin, Boston, and Frankfurt. We also have our AI mentors. Our experts will provide mentoring to Alldus members. And don't forget our AI in Action podcast. Each week we have guests from all over the world talking us through their education, career, and more. Become an Alldus member and get the Alldus advantage. For more information and to sign up for our newsletter, log on to www.alldus.com. That's www.alldus.com. Alldus International, empowering through AI.